So now we're going to start working on checking to see if the merchant codes, if there are any invalid merchant codes in the transactions in our data set, because that would be a violation of the controls. So let's have a look. So we have the two database, the prohibited codes and the transaction data. I'm going to open the transaction data. I'm going to go up here to the analysis tab. So if you're on the file or the home tab, click on the analysis tab, and then I'm going to go to join. And what I'm going to do is join the invalid codes, the prohibited codes, with the transaction database, and that will help me to identify any transactions that have an invalid code. So I'm going to hit join, and it's going to automatically use as the primary database the database that I had open and active. So that was, in my case, the transactions. And so then it says what's the second database that you want to join to that. So I'm going to select the other one. All right, so if for some reason prohibited was the one you had active, it will fill that in as the primary. Then you would select the other one, which would be transactions, so that you have the two different data sets in here. And then you indicate which field you want to match. And so I'm going to click on match. And then you click in here and it'll give you choices. And we want to match on the vendor merchant code. Come over here and invalid codes. The name of the variable doesn't have to match, but the format does. So see the C here? That's character. And see the N here? That's numeric. So it's going to give me an error message because the codes have to have the same format for them to be able to be joined. So I'm going to hit O, OK, and it's going to give me this error. So I'm going to cancel out, and the question is, how do I fix that? So with this database open, I can come over here to the vendor codes, and if I right click on here, it will allow me to, actually I think I could just double click quickly. It will tell me the type, the format of these various things. So it's telling me here's my vendor codes. It's telling me that those are in as a character, when I can see right now it's numerical, but it's treating that as if it was alpha. And so I'm going to click on character and I'm going to change it to numeric and then hit OK. It's going to warn you that it might not go well, and I'm going to say OK. So now if you double click on it, it shows the vendor code is numeric. Now I can go back to analysis and join, and the primary data set is the transactions, and I can go now and select the prohibited codes. And now it should allow me to match. Click in here and pick the vendor codes. Now see there's an N. And then come over here and pick invalid codes, and they both are in, so it's going to allow it. It's not going to give me the match. And I'm going to match. I want any transactions that match the invalid code. So I'm going to hit OK. And so now it's going to give me a new database. This is the join database. And I could have named it as I was going through there, but I didn't. If I want to rename it, I have to close it. So I'm going to close it and I'll rename it. Invalid codes. That looks like quite a few, 494. Let's open it up and have a look. Okay, so wow, that's a lot of transactions there, aren't there? It's a lot of transactions to invalid codes. So, and it looks to me like is it all the same person? And we could summarize this by person. It's almost all Billy Manson. So Billy's got some talking to do. It looks like there's 3 separate people here. But what we're going to do is we're going to download this so that we can use it as evidence in our report. All right, so I'm going to go over here to File, Export. I'm going to export as an Excel file. You can pick whatever you want, the most recent Excel or the old Excel. And then you're going to give it a name. So we're going to call these invalid merchant codes or something similar to that. And then you tell it where you want to go. So I'm telling it to go to my project folder and then hit OK. So now you should be able to go to your project folder and pull it up and have a look at it. Let's do that. Okay, so here is what I downloaded. So you can sort of scroll down and kind of verify that this is what was in IDEA, and it's come down. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to import this and put it into my audit program file. So here's how I do that. I right click on this, go to move or copy. I'm going to create a copy, and I'm going to pull down here, and I'm going to tell it to go to the audit program file and hit OK. And now it shows up over here. I'm going to just click on it, drag it, and put it behind my audit program, and I'm going to call this, oh my goodness, let's call this tab A. It's going to be my invalid codes. Now I can go to the audit C tab A for transactions with invalid codes, because I got a bunch of them, so I have to report that as control breaches. So here is my invalid codes. Now, this is not very professional looking. These labels are cut off. The variable titles are set up for a database. They're not really set up for a report. So, and some of these columns we don't need. Like this column is not very helpful. I don't even know what that is. IDEA, yes or no. The cardholder name, we definitely need that card number. We've got posted date, transaction date. I guess transaction date is probably the most helpful, so I don't need both. Transaction description, that's probably helpful. Vendor code, yes. Exchange rate, we don't need. Document amount, source amount, so there's no difference, so I'll leave document amount in there. The currency we don't need. The source of the transaction we don't need. Airlines, we can leave that invalid codes. Don't we already have the invalid codes? Yeah, we've already got the code, so we don't need that as well. So this is really the data we need to follow up, or the management needs to follow up. And then we'll put in something useful to the reader. Maybe something like that. Now, want to be sure that nothing bleeds off. Now, each of these columns has a different width, and that doesn't end up being very professional. So you don't want more than about 2 or 3 different widths. I'm going to turn this into dollars so it's nicely formatted. So maybe two of the columns, I can make them a little bit wider, so that I don't have a bunch of columns that are different widths. It just leads to a less polished view. All right. So this is tab A. You want to be sure you've got nice everyday language at the top. If you like, you could even maybe shade it. You don't want to go real dark because you want to have a nice contrast with the contents of the cell, so that it shows up. And dark shading, if you copy it, makes it difficult to see the text inside, so you don't want to do that. Okay. And if you want, you can get a total at the bottom. That might be helpful when you're getting ready to do your final report. If you want to give the total dollar amount of invalid codes. That's a lot of transactions with invalid codes. We've got 494 totaling 90,000. So when you're giving your final report and summarizing the control breaches, you can say we had 494 transactions totaling this amount that violated this particular control. So that's really not looking good here. All right, so let's move on then. Back to the audit program. The next thing we want to do is Benford's Law. All right, let's have a look. So I'm not going to do Benford's Law on the invalid code, so I'm going to close that out. I'm going to do it on the transaction, so I'm going to open the transaction data. And I'm going to go up here to analysis, and then I'm going to go to Benford's law. And you get lots and lots of choices. We're not going to get too deep into Benford's law. Benford's law is the shape that valid commercial transactions tend to have. And so we're testing to see whether our data set matches the shape of traditional valid commercial transactions, where 4s aren't very frequently represented in commercial data sets because most transactions don't end in a 4. Prices are not usually $1.44. They might be $1.99 or $3 or $3.25, but they don't. 4's not used very often. 8s are not used very often. So anyway, Benford's law has a distribution of how often digits show up in a valid commercial database. So we're going to just test to see. Now, before we get going on this test, we are going to probably violate Benford's law in some ways, and that is because the controls for this particular purchasing card forbids you from going over 2,500, which means you're restricted on anything over 4 digits and anything more than 1,000. You can't start with a 3 or a 4 or a 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or a 9. You can only start with a 1 or 2, 1,000 or 2,000, because you're not supposed to go above 2,500. So that is going to reduce the number of times that 3s, 4s, 5s, 6s, 7s, 8s, and 9s show up in this data set. So we actually should violate Benford's law for some of it. We should have more 1s and 2s and fewer 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8s and 9s than a normal data set. So we are actually expecting to violate it with a certain kind of pattern, like too many 1s and 2s and not enough of everything else. So let's see how that goes. All right, so let's just look at the first digit. We don't need to look at everything, just the first digit of each of the dollar amounts. All right, so let's have a look. So this colored curve here, that's the upper limit and the lower limit of a typical set of commercial transactions. So we're way high in the 1s. We expected to be way high, didn't we? I expected to be way high in the 2s, so that surprises me a little bit, except for many of the transactions were not above 2,000. So we just didn't really have that many big ones. We had lots and lots of little ones. So that actually would exaggerate. We'd be much more likely to have something that starts in 1,000 than we would 2,000. So that would be reasonable. A little bit higher on the 4s, not quite sure about that. This is within tolerance on the 8s, but all the others are way under, which we expect. So what we need to do is we need to put this into our report. On a separate tab. I've just clipped it with the screenshot here. Sometimes students are able to export as a PDF, and that works. About half the classes have been able to do that. I'm not sure if it has to do with the computer that they're on or something like that. But just taking a screenshot, which means you hold down your control key and you hit your print screen key, tap it, and then you open a Word document and right click and paste, and that will paste the screenshot, and then you can copy that image onto a fresh sheet here. All right, so we've got tab B here. This is Benford's law. Make it big enough so it can be seen. Now we need to explain it. So let's insert a text box and let's explain it. So you might explain it like that or something similar to that for your reader. So You can't just put the graph in there without interpreting the graph, especially since the graph is showing out of bounds in both directions. All right, and then you'd go to your audit program and you would indicate that you've done that particular test. All right, that's enough for this one. We'll do the rest of it in the third part of this series. All right, see you in a few minutes on the next one.